another classic WoW Season of Discovery video for you. Now today we are checking out some logs and also giving people some rankings based on a tier list system based on their performance so far in the BFD raid. So basically we're doing another tier list and checking out how this one performs compared to the last one. We have a lot more data now on which classes are actually good, because now we are not really just speculating. We have some facts and some statistics to back it up, and we have gotten to play some classes as well. We are currently in week number 2 of SOD, and I have 3 level 25 characters I'm raiding with, so we're doing 3 runs per reset. So I'm trying to build like different compositions to see what works best and to test people out, to test out classes, just to see what performs and what performs a little bit less. So once again today we are ranking that in a tier list format, and let's just get right into it, boys. So here we have all the classes. We're doing DPS this time, so just DPS, the best DPS in SOD pretty much, and we're once again giving people a rank. Some of these might be controversial. I'm not really going to be ranking these based on top DPS, like top maximum DPS, because we're doing a statistics overview towards the end, and there you can see the top maximum DPS your class can do at this point, just so you can have that as well. But there are some classes that are really favored compared to others when just making a raid overall, so hopefully this tier list might help you evaluate which class to play and which classes to avoid, or which specs to play and which specs to avoid. So let's get into it. Let's start off with the Ret Paladin, shall we? And I think we can all agree in this one pretty much only goes one place, and that is all the way up in S tier. It might not be the top of S tier, we'll get back to that later, but definitely S tier for now. So after that we have Frost Mage. I kind of want to hold on the Frost Mage a little bit and discuss that more in depth towards the end. So we'll skip a couple of these guys and go straight up to Assassination. So Rogue. Assassination rogues can do incredibly well, and I will say this, you might not feel that strong to begin with. You definitely want to have some gear. The same thing can be for every single melee, even though Rets, they get a really good weapon from their class quest, which nobody else gets, right? So they get a really good weapon from a class quest, giving them what they need. As a melee, you need to have a strong physical weapon to increase your DPS quite a bit. So as a rogue, once again, Assassination, you need to have a weapon. Once you have a weapon, you can go all the way up to S tier if you do well, and if you have like the best gear you can. For the most part, I'm gonna put these in A tier, and I'll say this, some of the bosses inside BFD have either natural high poison resistance or they are poison immune, which means if you're playing Mutilate build with deadly poisons or with the deadly brew or whatever the rune is called, you might want to have an off spec, or you might want to have like the ability to swap out runes. And what I know most rogues do there is they go saber slash spec for either all the bosses or the bosses that have a high natural nature resist or poison immunity, right? So if you can't hit them with poisons, just go saber slash or any other spec, in which case combat could do really well. But overall combat will not be doing the same as Assassination, but they're both like, they play with each other, because you want to be combat for some runs and assassination for some as well. We don't have a dual spec right now, so I'm just going to put combat down here in comparison. Assassination does do more DPS overall, but it's kind of weird to put them into a spec because you're putting talent points kind of everywhere. Even as combat, you probably put some kind of talent points into assassination at this point for more crit and stuff. So once again, it's really weird. Subtlety as well, you do the same thing. So I'm just going to put these two here because you're going back and forth between runes that uses these two specs, and we'll completely ignore subtlety for now, even though that's not to say you can't play subtlety, it's just this is like rogue overall. Now let's throw a couple of classes directly into the bin, which is going to be D tier. This is like the garbage disposal pretty much, and there's a couple of classes you basically don't play or that don't do particularly well in this raid, and there's a couple of reasons why. They haven't really been buffed that much, DPS wise, and they still have mana issues. I mean, as a balance though, you can spam Wrath without any mana cost, so that's great. But it's not competitive on DPS. It's like you can have a balanced druid doing 60 DPS, or you can have a retribution paladin doing 140 DPS, more than twice, while also bringing interrupt, bringing everything. Even though that's a range, that's a melee, doesn't really matter too much. There's one boss where that might matter, but you can also bring a hunter, for example, which brings once again double the DPS of a boomkin, and also brings more utility. So not just double DPS, more stuff on top, which is absolutely insane. So these two right here, it's not really like the best in phase 1, definitely can change in phase 2, and I personally have a theory where the classes that didn't get the best runes in phase 1 will get something sick in phase 2. That's just me, and the way I think everything comes to a natural means in the middle. Like if something is insanely buffed in phase 1, it's gonna get very nerfed in phase 2, and likewise if something is very bad in phase 1, it's gonna be very good in phase 2, or at least I hope so. Either way, those two you probably don't want to play. And while we're on the topic of putting people in the bin, I'm gonna put Elemental down there as well. Even though I haven't played the Shaman, I've gotten feedback from both my stream, both on YouTube and on Twitch. I'm live right now, by the way, so I've gotten some feedback, I've read some forums, read some threads, and once again we do have a DPS damage statistics meter for Elemental and like all the classes that suggests they don't do particularly well. That being said, you do bring totems, so you could actually put them in C tier, but I'll just put them here for now, and you can complain about me in the comments down below and let me know where you put them. Now, let's move on to my class. We're just going to skip enhancement for a little bit and move on to my class, which is Destruction Warlock and Affliction Warlock. We're going to skip Demonology because nobody really plays Demo for DPS in phase 1. It's more of a tank build, and once again we're ranking DPS. So we have two specs for Warlocks, and that's Destro and Affliction. Destruction is doing really well. I'm playing Affliction, I'm going to be changing, but I've been playing Affliction because I have a lot of shadow damage that I've gotten while leveling and on my first clear. So we have a lot of shadow damage items, but Destro is doing really well, and you can buy a lot of fire damage gear on the Auction House that gives you like a lot of DPS output very early, and they're somewhat cheap. Just search on the Auction House for Phoenix, and you will have Phoenix gloves, Phoenix legs, and Phoenix bindings, all of which increase your fire spell damage. The only bad thing there is they give you no stamina and no intellect, but if you do the mechanics correctly as a ranged, you barely take damage. So once again, the only thing you care about is your damage output, not technically your survival. So Destro can do really well, but once again you do want to have spell power, and the more spell power you have, the more DPS you do. I know that sounds obvious, but us as range, we scale really well. Even as an Affliction Warlock, just having done one run through and I got 2 items with plus spell power, including the trinket, my DPS skyrocketed from like plus 20 spell power, so that's pretty huge. Now, to give them a ranking though, we'll put Destro up in A tier, right next to Rogue. And I know if you're in like a hardcore guild and you have a really good geared Rogue, he will be pulling way more DPS than the Destro Warlock, most likely. But for most people, like if you haven't done 7 resets already, or something like that, and you don't have the best in slot gear on your Rogue, you will probably not be competing over Ret either. And the thing is, Rogues should be able to do more DPS than Ret Paladins, which kind of sounds weird. So Affliction Warlock on the other hand should be going into B tier, and I'll put this right now, they should be low B tier, because the DPS disparity here is kind of big, but Affliction does well on some bosses. Like on a turtle boss, I actually topped, right? So on some bosses you do really well as Affliction, and some bosses you don't really do that well. It depends on how much movement you have to do, but the same thing can be said for Resto. The one thing I like about being Affliction is that when I have to move, my damage over time stays still tick, and also I can use life tap while also dealing damage during that global cooldown, and I can multi-dot. Like if a boss requires multi-dotting, I can multi-dot. If we're lacking some DPS on some ads or something, right, then I can be of use as an Affliction Warlock. Either way, Destro is definitely better. Alright, we don't really have that many more specs to talk about, so let's just go through the last couple. Let's start this off with Hunter. Everyone knows Hunters are absolutely popping off right now, both Beast Mastery and Marksmanship, and pretty much like I said before the season came out, if you want to do big DPS without having to have any gear yourself, Beast Mastery can pump. Get a Scorpion Pet. Even now, after the nerf and rebuff, they're still really good. So Scorpion Pet, there's a rare you can get as well, which has even more attack speed, and that way your Scorpion can do insane DPS. On top of that, Hunter Pet can actually tank the raid. If you have, once again, you have to have the Beast Mastery rune, you have to have the talents for it, and then the pet will also get a snapshot of your current buffs. So if you use something like a stamina increase, the pet will get that stamina increase as well, and then buffing your pet. Once again, the Beast Mastery rune gives your pet a taunt, and I know Hunters that have main tanked the entire raid. There are some bosses you might want to have another tank on, which is for example Lorgus Jet, which requires movement, and on the last boss having an off tank could be good, but for the most part Hunters can actually main tank, which is really weird. So once again, Beast Mastery Hunters can do really well, Marksmanship Hunters are definitely top of the line. And to give them a ranking, obviously marksmanship is S tier, and it's the top of the S tier as well. They're doing so much DPS, it is ridiculous. And beast mastery for me is like S tier as well, but in between. So marksmanship, ret, and then beast mastery in this case so far. Once again, we do have a couple more classes to go through, one of which will be in S tier, maybe two of which, we'll see. But so far it looks like this. So marksmanship is definitely top of the line though. You can do so much DPS just by having pre-bis as well, so you don't even need like any gear from the raid. Now let's go through some of the bin classes once again. So we have Frost Mage, and we have Frost Mage. I'll put those in C tier right now because you can actually do somewhat decent DPS as Frost. Now, would I ever bring a Frost Mage? That's another question. I don't see any reason to go Frost over Fire, but yeah, Enhancement as well, C tier in this case. I don't really, well, I play Alliance, so I see no Shamans, but even on the Horde side, the Shamans you bring is very minimal. If you want Wind Fury, you have Feral Druids. Enhancement Shaman, I don't really know. What do they bring other than, yeah, what other people bring? I don't really know about that one. So Enhancement Shamans, C tier, Frost Mages, C tier so far. We'll also go through and put Fire Mages in this current tier, and Fire Mages I will put right here next to Affliction Warlocks. Is like either slightly better or slightly worse. Once again, Affliction Warlocks do pump on some bosses, but so does Fire. They can also pump. Once again, you do need a lot of fire damage to make the spec viable, so I think like maybe Affliction Warlocks will have a slightly higher spot because you need less gear to make Affliction viable compared to Fire, based on the mana issues. Even though like as a mage you will have one evocation per fight, as long as you spend 6 minutes between the bosses, right? So you have to use your mana, evocate, get your mana back, and spam once again. But as an Affliction Warlock, you have endless life tap. And once again, I'm topping some of the boss fights, especially the ones where I'm not allowed to not move, just stand still, full damage over times, and I have so much self-sustain. On Kelris, for example, I can be a third healer, because I'm healing myself so much, just from Soul Siphon, Siphon Life or whatever, Drain Life in this case, and also Haunt. So Affliction Warlock, not only do I do somewhat decent DPS, I also have decent self-sustain, at the same time reducing the actual healing output needed by the healers in this case. But I mean, I'm life tapping, so I'm healing myself, but either way, I feel like they deserve a slightly higher spot based on that. But once again, keep in mind, Fires can pump, and they do deserve to be kind of close to Destro Warlocks in the end. So now we only really have two more specs / classes, well actually three to put on the tier list. One is a warrior, the other one is a feral DPS, and the last one being arcane mage. Now let's start off with a warrior. I do think we have quite a few warriors in Season of Discovery. I mean, it's a very popular class in Classic WoW, and thankfully they're still top DPS, baby. Like, warriors are insanely good. Even now you can see in our raid we had a warrior topping DPS on Kelris, and I'm just gonna spoil it, he topped the DPS for every single boss fight. That being said, he had the epic sword, but warriors are doing really well, I will just say. Gear dependent. They always have been, always will be. You want to have crit, hit, strength. The problem is when you don't have enough hit, you will miss a lot, but the tier set gives you hit. You can get the shifting silver breastplate, I think it's called, for hit as well, and then the stacking strength on top of that as well. So warriors are pumping, you just need a ton of gear to actually pump. That being said, even though he had the epic sword, he wasn't higher than about 200 gear score, which I know that's probably a lot already, but my warlock, for example, is 250, and the warrior was way less gear score than me, and still absolutely pumped on those DPS meters. So warriors are really well, really. Very good England, Solheim. Yes, they're really good, and I'm gonna put them like all the way up here. I'm still gonna rank marksman slightly higher due to the lower gear requirement, and I'll just put that as a verbal right now so you can hear me say that. Warriors can do better. Warriors are better than marksmanship, but they do need a lot of gear to do so, and like, they're really dependent on the weapons they have. So the epic sword obviously gives a huge boost, but you can also get the epic bow for marksmanship. But if you have two absolute best in slot people, one is a marksmanship, the other one is a warrior, on the DPS meters the warrior should be doing slightly better. and once again we will have statistics to look at afterwards to try to back that up. Now Feral Druids I'll also put into a S tier so far, so we have quite a few S tiers, but there's 2 of the same class, so there's 4 classes: Hunter, Warrior, Paladin, and also Feral Druid. And if you look at top DPS in your raids, I'm guessing these guys will be among the top, right? So Marksmanship, Fury, Ret, BM, and Feral DPS. Feral DPS can even go into the raid and do decent DPS without needing any gear whatsoever. Like, I went into the raid 1 hour after hitting level 25 on my druid, we did 7 out of 7, and I averaged 85 DPS on bosses, which if you can look at the DPS right now, that's pretty like decently up there, and this is a fairly good geared group. Like the Warriors doing 110 with Epic Sword, and Ferals can do about 85 plus. Like, I'm not even the right spec, I'm using Feline Swiftness instead of Omen of Clarity, so using the right spec you can do even more, and that is just as a badly geared Feral. Now add items on top of that as well, maybe the weapon from BFD, you will be absolutely pumping. On top of that, not only do you bring good DPS and low gear requirements, you bring Wind Fury, which everyone wants you for. So picking a Feral Druid DPS, you can never go wrong. Sure, you will have some competition, but everyone needs one Feral for their raid, so you will pretty much always have a raid spot if you ask me. And if you're struggling and playing on Living Flame, I do believe we still need a few Ferals, so feel free to. We need Ferals, and we need Discipline Priests, or basically Priest Healers. So that being said, we have one more class, and that is Arcane Mage. I'll put this in C tier, and I kind of want to put it at the top of C tier, because Arcane Mages can do really well compared to Frost and Enhancement. So far, that's what the tier list looks like. I will say the Beastmastery Hunter can be both ranged and melee, by the way. Doesn't really matter, most of your damage comes from your pet, and then you will just add on top. The benefit of being melee is using something like Flanking Strike, for example, attacking both yourself and the pet at the same time. So you can be melee, can be ranged, entirely up to you. And I believe that's every single DPS. Like Subtlety we don't care about, Demo we don't care about, and when it comes to Warriors we put Fury and Arms in the same, because you can just pick and choose based on the weapons you have, right, and then the runes you have. So Fury is just Warrior DPS basically, and then Prot, Tank, Resto, and Survival. So there we go, those are the DPS specs. This is my tier list so far, based on what I have seen in my 7 out of 7 raids, and all of the other pugs as well, plus what I have seen on other streams, and also the actual statistics. Speaking of, let's check them out. So here we go, here we can see the actual statistics for every single class based on how they are doing, and as we can see, the Marksmanship Hunter is currently in the lead, followed by DPS Rogue, followed by Melee Hunter, which I'm guessing is Marksmanship, no Beastmastery I mean, so Beastmastery / Melee. Then we have Feral Druid, Warrior DPS, Ret Paladin, DPS Warlock, Destro in this case, Arcane Mage, Fire Mage, Enhancement Shaman, Frost Mage, Elemental Shaman, Balance and Shadow. And this is just like the average ranking so far based on all of the standings we have. We also have down here, you can see their max DPS output, their scores, and we have ranked classes based on their maximum. So based on their maximum output / outreach, you can see Warrior is number 1, Rogue is number 2, Feral number 3, Marksmanship number 4, then Paladin number 5, and you can see all the classes going down as well, just to give you like an idea of how the classes can perform and how they are currently performing. So hopefully this tier list was good for you, and hopefully my estimations on their tier rankings is somewhat correct, based on, this is just like how I find the classes to be, based on their entire setup and how they look like in week 2. You're not going to have full bis in week 2, at least not everyone has, it's basically impossible, but either way, that's my tier list. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did and want to let me know how good the tier list was, come by on stream. And likewise, if you hate the tier list, then feel free to come by on stream and tell me how absurdly wrong I am and how much of an idiot I am, live on stream both on YouTube and Twitch. Either way, thank you for watching, I'll see you again very soon, peace.